Good evening. And, yeah, I know, I'm back. So, I'm not doing this because of the plague. I'm doing this because I've had my mind on doing something like this. And it's probably the best tactic that I can take with this channel right now. And basically, I'm going to take a specific game from the 1980s and go over its origins, its basic rule set, advantages and disadvantages over similar games, and general impressions and popularity and things like that as I saw them. Numbers might be different from my experience. I'm telling you this ahead of time because my experience is one city. I did not see how well this did anywhere outside my immediate urban area and my groups within this immediate urban area. So, back in the 1980s, almost every game out there borrowed a lot from Dungeons and Dragons. No matter what genre it was, it used renamed versions of the same statistics. It used the same concepts of roll to hit, roll for damage, etc., etc. Well, of course, because it wasn't ready, it wasn't time yet for experimenting. Time would start in the middle of the decade. One of those experimental games actually came out well before. 1981 saw the rise of champions. Now, it still went through the idea of having different stats, but then it had calculated stats or figured characteristics, and so on and so forth. Anyway, this was also the time when different licensed properties started seeing games come out, such as Ninja Turtles and Robotech for the Palladium game system. You had The Elementals, which was a third-party comic book, come out for Villains and Vigilantes, and more. And the idea of this setting is perfect for a role-playing game started to catch on. You had the City of Lankmar adventures for Dungeons and Dragons, which was official. You had games for fantasy explicit milieus, like Stormbringer for the Elric of Melniboné series by Michael Moorcock. You had, there's an actual Doctor Who role-playing game, Judge Dredd role-playing game. So it was about the time that, not just in spite of, but almost thanks to the Satanic Panic, everyone wanted a role-playing game for their property. And DC Comics was no different. So they went to Mayfair and said, make us a game. People at Mayfair said, okay. Wait a minute. We got to make a comic book where Superman and Robin are on the same team, and if someone wants to play the Justice League, both players have to feel like they're contributing something, and we still have to make Superman feel like Superman. How do we do that? Well, the primary answer was already given back in 1981 with the release of Champions. For the most part, Champions was a complete and utter overhaul of the idea of role-playing games. You didn't roll up a character. You built a character with points. And 1 point would buy you, say, 1 point of strength. It might take you 10 points to buy a point of not movement, but reaction speed, the number of actions you can make in a given 12-second round. and so on and so forth. But one of the things they did was that strength, whether it's your physical muscle or your telekinesis or what have you, every time you add 5 points, you're doubling. So someone who is a strength of 20 is 4 times as strong as the average person who has a strength of 10. Someone with a strength of 60 is over 1,000 times as strong as an ordinary person. Well, Mayfair said, we have 55 years of comic books to draw on, because this was about 1984 when they were writing the game, maybe a little bit before then. We need to cover not just super strength, but the Flash can travel so fast he travels through time. Green Lantern can create a construct with his ring the size of a planet. And speaking of planets, Superman. Yeah, in one notable 1960s appearance, Superman was covered in some kind of alien goop that wouldn't let him absorb solar energy. But the bottoms of his feet were dry. So he did a handstand. You'd figure that the average person on the street would be like, why is Superman doing a handstand? I don't know. But what was really doing was his feet were absorbing solar energy, and he was pushing the planet out of orbit to dodge an incoming laser ray that would have destroyed Metropolis. And then he flew to the other side of the planet and pushed it back. Presumably that wouldn't be as embarrassing because, well, Metropolis is generally agreed to be somewhere in the New York, New Jersey area, and the opposite side of the planet is, the Pacific Ocean. And I don't think dolphins would be like, why is Superman doing a handstand? Anyway, lots of experience and stuff to deal with, and they had to come up with a system to cover it all, and so they did. APs. APs means attribute points or action points. I think it's attribute points. And everything is measured in APs. Time, distance, mass. It's all measured. And what that lets us do, it solves a lot of our problems with math. Like, okay, pre-crisis Superman has a strength of 50. Okay. So he picks up a softball. No. Let's make this a bit easier. He picks up a car. How far can he throw a car? Well, a car weighs about 1.5 tons. Well, let's make it a 1970s big old steel body car. Let's say 2 tons. Okay. 2 tons. That would be about 7 APs. Well, 50 APs of strength minus 7 APs of weight is 43 APs of distance. Or roughly 0.1% of a light year. You then turn to Spider-Man. Well, let's assume that there was a BC Comics character the exact same strength who could lift 10 tons, which is roughly a 9 strength. He can throw that same car 2 APs. 2 APs is roughly 40 feet. Done. Simple. Bang, bang, bang. Oh wait, what if it's a 1-ton car? Okay, just double the distance. Or the Flash runs at 29 AP speed, which is light speed. He needs to cover 18 APs of distance. That's less than his speed, so bang, he does it in a fraction of a second. But then he needs to cover a light year. Well, without pushing, which is an interesting mechanic, 52 minus 29. That's about 23. Well, 10 is an hour, 15 is a day, 8, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256 days at, to cover the, or basically up to 256 because it's that range of numbers, but basically half a year to travel half a light year. Simple. Hey, there we go. Now, that's the attributes. What about the system? Well, they come up with an interesting one. And that system comes up. Now, I've blurred it for copyright reasons. There's some issues going on with the system, so I've blurred most of this chart. This is how everything is handled. Combat, let's say. Let's say Batman just wants to haul off and punch the Joker. No skill, no training, just a good old bap. Batman, at least in most editions, has a dexterity of 9. And the Joker has a dexterity of 7. So we look up here, and we find on the vertical chart, we find 9. And we see it's 9 and 10 are in the same column. We then look up at this part of the chart, and we can see that 7 and 8, same here. Well, you can't read it, but basically, Batman needs to roll on 2 10-sided dice, a 9 or better, to hit the Joker. Now, you may be wondering, well, why are their numbers continuing on as high as they are in the black areas? Everything was handled by rolling 2d10. If you rolled doubles, except double ones, you got to roll again and add. So if you rolled double 8s, double 10s, and then a 2 and a 3, that'd be a 37 that you rolled on this chart. Now, the way, if you hit, you then go down. Batman's strength is a 5. The Joker's body, which is your durability, is also a 5. We look here, and we see he takes, well, it doesn't say there, but he takes a point of damage. Maybe 2. And that comes off his body, not his actual score, but his current body, because that handles your physical hit points. If he rolls really high and gets into those black numbers, every time he moves into a column with a black number, it adds, or it subtracts a column from the bad guy's resistance. Now, it starts, you don't automatically get a column if you need a number in the black to hit. It starts after the roll you need to hit. And if you bring it down to a negative number, you just start adding a point to your total damage. So, if the Penguin sees Superman coming and decides, I ain't got a chance, but hey, and he picks up a rock off the ground and chunks it at Superman, and then the player playing the Penguin rolls 125. It can happen. I've seen it done. Very rare, but it can happen. Well, you go through the whole rigmarole to find out that with a simple rock, the Penguin has stunned Superman. He's just like, go. And he has time to get away. Well, yes, that's possible with the system, but a good game master would say, okay, but that rock was secretly, and he didn't know it, part of the Rock of Eternity and was therefore innately magical. Now, the description doesn't create the game effect. The game effect is explained by the description. The game effect was the Penguin rolled outrageously high and damaged someone he really shouldn't have been able to. So the game master has come up with an excuse. But in any event, this was handled for combat, interpersonal interaction. Although most of the time you only use the top one. for accomplishing feats, finding clues, whatever. You used this chart, and very rarely this one. This one was usually only combat. Anyway, but by having that system with the exponential stats for everything, the chart method instead of a +1 or +2, the chart method for damage instead of +1d6, they ended up creating a system that could actually handle the powerhouses like Superman and Martian Manhunter and Green Lantern and Captain Marvel, while still being valid for the question, for Stars and Stripesy, and any number of street level characters. Now the problem is, yes, the game system worked, but the character creation was a little anemic. And the gadgetry system was out and out ridiculous. I'm not even going to get into it. But in 1985, first edition DC Heroes came out. And they had the art and the artists of DC Comics behind them. And it made the art of the competition for champions, villains and vigilantes, Hero World, Palladium Heroes Unlimited. It's Heroes Unlimited. Looks so weak. But it was only just a couple years later they had decided to go back through their system and redo a lot of the weaker spots, especially the gadgeteering and the character creation. And we ended up with second edition. Second edition is, for one, the cover is so much better. This is probably one of my favorite role-playing game covers of all, because this is all it needs. You have Superman, you have Batman, you have DC Heroes. Role-playing game. That's all you need. And it pretty much set the pace for the rest of the existence of this game. A third edition came out sometime later, but all it was it's almost identical to second edition with a few rules tweaks and erratas and compiled into a single book. Now, genre, pretty obvious. It's a superhero game. It was very cinematic. Very cinematic. But at the same time, it gave enough detail to where you could make the character you wanted to make. But it was also simple enough and fast enough that combat was just going like this when you got started and had a good game master. It was in my opinion, it's one of the best superhero games ever made. Yep. Bye-bye, kitty. Anyway. No fuzz. So, the complexity, it was pretty simple. It was extremely grainy down near the street level. When the difference between, in just sheer physical stats, the difference between Batman and Blue Beetle is only 1 or 2 points in any given physical stat. It's a little grainy. Their mental stats are quite different. Ted Kord is much more of an inventor and not as charismatic or mentally powerful and overwhelmingly willful as Bruce Wayne. But physically, there's only a point of dex, a point of strength, and I think 2 points of body difference between them. That's it. And then, of course, skills, again, 1 or 2 point differences. Batman usually having the advantage, but even so, when you get up to Martian Manhunter and Superman, Superman had a strength, at least in 2nd edition on, which represented the post-crisis DC Comics, coincidentally. Superman had a 25 strength. Martian Manhunter had an 18. Still vastly superhumanly strong, tossing ships. But with a 25, he is several columns above Martian Manhunter. Now, playing the game. It was entirely possible to play the game with nothing but pre-existing DC Comics characters. It was also highly possible to play the game with your own custom character. And to be honest, that was probably more fun. You could create your own campaign world. You know, you can do that by either just slapping a new coat of paint on Superman and Batman. No, I'm not looking at you, Apollo and Midnighter. Or you could just create your own world, whatever. You could play it in the DC Heroes world. You could use an existing other company's comic characters and play in that. Even though they got their own game over here, you could do that. Yeah. And, however, it was pretty much aimed at, if you're not playing the DC characters, you're at least playing your own characters in the DC universe. Box it in. There were dozens and dozens of supplements that usually fell into one of 2 categories. Either they were a source book, like World at War, which is about World War II, or the Teen Titans source book, or the Legion, or they were a module. And there weren't actually that many modules. It was mostly source books. And then towards the end of DC system, as DC, we'll get to that in a minute, they started releasing a kind of a fad in the 90s, really. It was shrink-wrapped binder pages for character stats. Basically, you'd buy it at the store, you'd go home and rip the plastic wrap off and take off the outer paper fold-around cover, slide them into a 3-ring binder, clop closed, and bam, there you go. Okay. Get up here. Good girl. And that way, when they came up with a new, another annual edition, you pop it into that book, and if you really wanted to, you could alphabetize them all, like hero, planet, villain, device, whatever. And yeah. And then DC Heroes kind of faded away in the 90s. And then some years later, somebody decided, you know what? It's entirely possible to remove every single reference to DC Comics and DC Comics characters, places, items, and things, and monsters, and what have you, and just take the core rule set and sell that as its own game. And so Pulsar Games purchased the rights to the system from Mayfair Games. One thing this led to this. Blood of Heroes. This is what happens when you take a game that had some of the best art in the business and you had to get rid of all of that art and replace it with art from people who were not quite at the same tier. I'm not going to insult them, they did their best, but it did look like a regression of the First Order. First edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, at least in the first several books, the art pretty much looked like college student illustrator art. Later on, when they became the name, they could just say, "Oh, hey, Frazetta, paint us a painting." "Oh, yeah, yeah, we'll take something from you, too." "Oh, you want to do a cartoon, Mr. Folio?" "Sure." This, once again, the art looks like the person who drew the art was a friend of the creator. It was creative, it was an interesting take, it was unusual, and it was stylized. But it was only okay. However, the rules were intact. They then had what was called the Sidekick Sourcebook, a series of alternate rules, new rules, and rules replacements. They then collected all together and combined it into... Oh yeah, I don't have a picture of that book. I have a copy, but can't find it. It's in the other room somewhere. But it was Blood of Heroes Special Edition, and that is about the time that problems hit. Without getting into too much, it appears that Time Warner at least believed that the contract between DC Comics and Mayfair Games meant that the entirety of the game was DC's property. Long story short, it's all tied up in courts, and the people who are current owners of Pulsar Games simply cannot afford to fight it. So for now, it's a game that will only be available, like far too many, in resale shops, or if your game store actually happens to have a copy still sitting on the shelf of Blood of Heroes or Blood of Heroes Special Edition, because I can guarantee you they will not have a copy of DC Heroes unless, number one, it's not really the Mayfair DC Heroes, it's one of the later games that came out as time passed, or number two, something's wrong with the book or the box, or it's missing pieces, or the book is damaged, because otherwise it would have been snatched up by collectors or snatched up and sold on eBay. Anyway, DC Heroes Role-Playing, or as it's also known, the Mayfair Exponential Game System, or MEGS, lives on still. There is a website called writeups.org that is a repository of thousands upon thousands of characters from TV, film, books, other companies' comic books, custom creation, radio plays, almost anything else written up in the system for DC Heroes / Blood of Heroes, or MEGS. It lives on in an email group that exists to create characters for writeups.org. It exists in the form of several other online internet communities dedicated to this game. And I will be honest, it is my favorite game to play as a superhero game. If I feel like running a superhero game, that is the game I grab. That system. Whether it's in a pre-existing universe or in one of my own creation, that is a system I will reach for, because it has the versatility, the speed of play, and the ease of learning that make it worth using. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go back into the other room and see if I can find my Blood of Heroes Special Edition. Alrighty. Y'all take care.